There is a version of Cheech and Chong that most people think they know. Two guys, a cloud of smoke, and a string of punchlines that somehow became the soundtrack to an entire generation. Simple, right? Two stoners who got lucky, stumbled into a microphone, and rode the wave of counterculture comedy all the way to Hollywood. That's the lazy version of the story, and it leaves out almost everything that actually matters. Because here is the truth. The real story of Richard Cheech Marin and Tommy Chong is far stranger, far richer, and far more surprising than anything you've seen in their films. Behind the laid-back personas were two men with completely different origins, unexpected talents, and lives that were shaped by forces entirely outside of comedy. One of them was a draft dodger turned pottery student. The other was a Motown-signed musician with Chinese and Scottish-Irish blood running through his veins. One would go on to build what is considered the largest private collection of Chicano art in the entire world. The other would end up in federal prison, sharing a cell with none other than the real Wolf of Wall Street. None of that sounds like a stoner comedy, and yet all of it is true. So if you think you know Cheech and Chong, stick around, because we're about to go deeper than the smoke ever did. Before we go anywhere, let's start with something so basic that most people have never thought to question it. Where exactly did the name Cheech come from? It wasn't a stage name invented by a manager or a character somebody invented for a sketch. The nickname came from family, and it came almost from the moment Richard Marin entered the world. Born on July 13, 1946, in South Central Los Angeles, Richard Anthony Marin was the son of Oscar Marin, a Los Angeles Police Department officer, and Elsa, his secretary mother. Shortly after he was born, an uncle leaned over his crib, took one look at the infant, and declared that the baby resembled a chicharrón, the crispy deep-fried pork skin treat beloved in Mexican cuisine. From that day forward, the family called him Cheech, and the nickname stuck for the rest of his life. It's a small detail, but think about what it tells you. Cheech Marin, a man who would go on to build one of the most recognized names in American comedy, got his stage name from a pork rind comparison made by a relative staring at him in a crib. Comedy, it seems, started early for him. He grew up in Granada Hills after his family relocated from South Central, and even as a kid, he was already developing the sharp instincts and love of performance that would define his career. He sang in bands, made his friends laugh, and earned a reputation as a class clown before he ever dreamed of a microphone. His English accent, by the way, the one that became so recognizable in all those comedy routines, completely fabricated. English was Cheech's first language, and the exaggerated Chicano accent he used on stage was a performance choice, not a reflection of how he actually spoke. That alone should tell you something about the craft hiding beneath the comedy. On the other side of this story is Tommy Chong, who was born in Edmonton, Alberta, to a Chinese father and a Scottish-Irish mother. Before he was ever a comedian, before he ran a topless bar in Vancouver's Chinatown, before he became the mellow hippie half of one of the most famous comedy duos in history, Tommy Chong was a working musician with a legitimate claim to music history. In the 1950s, early 1960s, Chong played guitar in a rhythm and blues band called the Shades, which later evolved into Bobby Taylor and the Vancouvers. That group didn't just play local gigs and regional festivals. They got signed to Motown Records, one of the most important record labels in American music history, the same label that produced Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, and the Supremes. That is not a footnote. That is a genuinely remarkable achievement, and it's one that almost nobody brings up when talking about Tommy Chong. The experience gave Chong something that most comedians never have: genuine stage discipline, an understanding of audience energy, and the kind of performance confidence that only comes from performing in serious musical contexts. When he eventually transitioned into comedy, he wasn't starting from scratch. He was redirecting a set of skills he had spent years developing. His timing, his physical ease on stage, his ability to hold a room, all of it had roots in those years of playing music at the highest level of the industry. By the time he met Cheech, Tommy Chong had already lived an entire career that most people never know about. The meeting that started everything happened in 1970 in Vancouver, at a club called the Shanghai Junk. Tommy Chong was running the place, which was located in Vancouver's Chinatown. But Chong, being Chong, couldn't simply run a standard establishment. He blended burlesque performance with improvised comedy sketches, turning the space into a kind of hybrid theater where his group, called City Works, performed original material between dance routines. Meanwhile, Cheech Marin had fled to Canada to avoid the Vietnam War draft. He had been studying English at California State University Northridge, working part-time in a factory that manufactured kitchen units for aircraft, and he had no particular plan beyond staying out of a war he wanted no part of. "I didn't want to get killed in Vietnam," he later said, about as plainly as a man can state something. So he left. And he ended up in Vancouver, doing whatever work he could find to survive, driving trucks, unloading carpets, just getting by. One night, looking for work, he walked into the Shanghai junk. Chong hired him to join the improv group. What happened next was not planned by either of them. During one of their early performances together, the two of them fell into an unscripted bit about a guy looking for his friend Dave. The other character, too, stoned to understand what was being asked of him, kept responding with the same confused reply, "Dave's not here." The audience erupted. Tommy Chong later called it an accident. But it became one of the most iconic comedy routines in American pop culture, and it launched a partnership that would span decades. When Cheech and Chong moved to Los Angeles and caught the attention of record producer Lou Adler, everything accelerated quickly. Their 1971 debut album was a genuine hit, cracking the Billboard Top 30 and earning a Grammy nomination for Best Comedy Recording. But it was their second album that made history. Released in 1972, Big Bamboo became the highest-selling comedy album in history at the time. The concept was brilliantly simple and brilliantly provocative. The album cover was designed to look exactly like a giant package of Bamboo brand rolling papers, and every vinyl copy came with an actual oversized rolling paper tucked inside. This was not subtle. This was Cheech and Chong telling the world exactly who they were and exactly who their audience was, and the world responded by buying the record in enormous numbers. The album was nominated for Best Comedy Recording at the 15th Grammy Awards, and it featured one of their most beloved routines, Sister Mary Elephant, in which a nun loses her composure trying to control an unruly classroom. The routine was later released as a single and peaked at number 24 on the Billboard Hot 100. That's a comedy sketch. On the pop singles chart, top 25. The following year, their third album Los Cochinos went even further, winning the Grammy Award for Best Comedy Recording. Over the course of their recording career, Cheech and Chong released 9 albums and earned 4 Grammy nominations, winning 1. In a musical landscape that rarely took comedy seriously as a craft, they found a way to be taken very seriously indeed. In 1978, Cheech and Chong made the jump from records to film with Up in Smoke, produced by Lou Adler, on an extremely modest budget. What happened next surprised almost everyone in Hollywood. The film became the highest-grossing comedy of 1978, taking in more than $100 million at the box office. To put that in perspective, it outperformed most of the major comedies released that year, and it did it on the kind of budget that studios typically reserved for minor projects. The film also introduced one of cinema's most unexpectedly sourced props. The iconic MUF DVR vanity license plate that appears in Up in Smoke was not invented by prop department. It was a real plate that had belonged to an actual Los Angeles Police Department officer. The plate had been attached to various cars over the years, including an American Motors Gremlin and a T-Top Corvette, before ending up on a customized VW Bug. The original owner kept the plates for decades, DMV stickers and all. So the most quoted visual gag in stoner film history came directly from a real police officer's personalized license plate. The irony practically writes itself. Up in Smoke established Cheech and Chong as what many in the industry called the most successful comedy team of their generation, compared by some critics and observers to the great double acts of previous eras, from Laurel and Hardy to Abbott and Costello to Martin and Lewis. Whether you agree with that assessment or not, the box office numbers were not a matter of opinion. In February 2003, DEA agents raided Tommy Chong's home in Pacific Palisades, California. This was part of a massive federal operation called Operation Pipe Dreams, which involved over 2,000 federal, state, and local law enforcement officers and cost approximately $12 million to execute. The operation targeted businesses selling drug paraphernalia across the United States, and it resulted in simultaneous raids on more than 100 homes and businesses in a single day. 55 people were arrested. Of those 55 individuals, exactly 1 received a prison sentence, Tommy Chong. Here is the part that makes the story even more remarkable. The company at the center of the case, Chong Glass Works, also operated under the name Nice Dreams, and had actually been started and run by Tommy's son, Paris Chong. Tommy himself had served primarily as an investor and a public face for the brand. Federal agents, posing as head shop owners from Pennsylvania, pressured the company to ship bongs across state lines into a state where paraphernalia laws were particularly strict. When the shipment went through, the case was made. Tommy Chong had never been arrested before in his life. Nevertheless, he faced charges of conspiracy to distribute drug paraphernalia. He entered a plea bargain, pleading guilty on the condition that his wife Shelby and his son Paris would not be charged or imprisoned. On September 11, 2003, he was sentenced to 9 months in federal prison, fined $20,000, and forced to forfeit over $100,000 in assets. The federal government stated explicitly that part of the reason for seeking such a harsh sentence was because Up in Smoke had, in their view, trivialized anti-drug efforts. A man went to prison, in part, because of a comedy movie he made 25 years earlier. Tommy Chong served his sentence at the Taft Correctional Institution. His cellmate, by a twist of fate that sounds entirely made up, was Jordan Belfort, the man whose life story was later dramatized in The Wolf of Wall Street. Of the 55 people arrested in Operation Pipe Dreams, Tommy Chong was the only one to serve prison time. Everyone else received fines and home detention. While Tommy Chong was navigating the legal system, Cheech Marin had been quietly building something that had nothing to do with comedy at all. Since the mid-1980s, Marin had been collecting Chicano art. It began, as he has described it, with an encounter at a Los Angeles gallery that he compared to hearing the Beatles for the first time. It was familiar and different at the same time, he said. I've heard